Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome everyone who's already participated with us and is rejoining for our fifth presentation, and welcome everyone that is new to our presentations and joining us just first today to the Opioid and Other Drugs virtual series. My name is Adrienne Luckenbacher. I'm one of your moderators for today's presentation, and the presentation today that you registered or you are viewing is called From Horror to Hope. I want to remind everyone that this virtual series is provided by St. Clair County Community Mental Health in partnership with the Community Services Coordinating Body. This webinar series is made possible by a grant award by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. We are continue to be very, very excited about providing this virtual series. And for those of you that aren't aware, the virtual series is done through the month of September, which is also National Recovery Month. And for those of you that have attended, you've heard me go over this several times. And for those of you that are new or just need a refresher, I generally go over some housekeeping materials and some general things about our presentation today. The first thing is today's session is being recorded. The second thing is we want to really encourage anyone to enter any questions and comments that you have during the presentation at any time throughout this webinar using the chat feature that's found at the bottom of your screen. If time allows at the end of presentation, we're really going to do our best to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. We may not get to all of them, but we will certainly do our best. We really hope that the chat box that you have serves as a really interactive place for folks to share their thoughts, their ideas, strategies, any kind of resources or additional information that you feel would be helpful to share out, as well as go ahead and ask questions. Then we also have continuing education credits for those of you who registered for CE in the registration page. Just to let you know, if you are looking for continuing education credits, this session is also being offered on Facebook Live right now and will be recorded, but any recordings or Facebook Live isn't eligible for continuing education credits. It needs to be registered and watched live. Couple of other housekeeping. For those of you that have heard this before, it's very important that when you signed into the webinar, that you use your full first and full last name. That's very important for us to be able to designate and to send out CEs. And for any reason, if you didn't put your first and last name, if you wouldn't mind going out and coming back in and entering that information, we would really appreciate it. For CEs, it's extremely important that you are logged in for the duration of the entire presentation from beginning to end. And for any reason, if you lose any kind of connectivity or link, just go ahead and link or register back in and you should be all set, or log yourself back in. CE credits will only be provided to those who provide or finish, a quiz and a survey at the end of the webinar. These materials were included in your registration email and must be completed within 7 days of the completion of the webinar. For this webinar today, for continuing education credits, we do have in and out codes. So our in code for today is winter. Now that's going to be all caps, winter, W-I-N-T-E-R. Now we're going to go ahead and move to today's presenter. Today's presenter, we would like to welcome Phil Pavona. Phil comes from us from Okemos, Michigan. He's retired from Lansing Sparrow Hospital and in 2011 as the Director of Pulmonary Services. With over 35 years in the healthcare system, Phil thought that he could easily navigate the system to help his son's heroin addiction. Although Phil had many, many connections, he surprisingly found that a system and a community that was fractured, disjointed, many times apathetic, and at all times ill-prepared to care for a family member dealing with opioid addiction. Speaking from a family perspective, he really encapsulates the essence of what is needed in recovery programs. Phil is also an active trained family recovery coach. And with that, we'd like to turn it over to Phil.
Thank you. First of all, I'm honored to be here. I wish I could be there in person with people in person. I have a lot of energy. This is difficult for me to do, kind of being stationary in one spot, but I'm going to do my best. I'm going to start off by saying, look, don't look at my ugly mug. I'm going to have a slideshow that most of you can see on the large screen there. And that's who I want you to look at, because eventually we'll get to the crux of this, because it's all about these folks here. Okay, so again, don't be looking at my ugly mug. Look at those folks there. Look in their eyes, look at how they're dressed, look at who they're with, because if I can't touch your heart and change your heart on how you view these people, then what it is that I have to say today will not stay within you very long. The folks that are coming across your screen right now range in age from 18. Yes, this young man with braces here is 18 years old. The oldest is 42 years old. These are all real Michigan families. I didn't cut them out of a magazine. These are either people that I've met, them and their families, or people that I've come across with afterwards with respect to kind of what their situation is. The thing that I want to say about these folks before I get into our story is 80% of them have something in common. Okay. Actually, 90% of these folks have something in common. I've added a few slides here. And 50% of them have something in common. I will get to that a little later in the presentation. But please, again, look at them, don't look at me. So I guess the best way to start this out is, why am I here and why is it that I do what it is that I do today? Well, obviously, you heard from the introduction, we had a son who struggled with opiate addiction. I'm a dad in Okemos. As the moderator mentioned, the host mentioned, I came from a medical background at Sparrow Hospital. I was there for over 35 years. And I'm just a dad in Okemos raising 5 kids. We have 5 kids. And our second one down the line, Eric, whom was a normal kid in junior high and high school. He did not do drugs. He did not really drink. He was kind of a nerd and a bookworm. Did the normal things, loved WWF and video games and movies and the usual things, sports. And scored a 32 on his ACT, so he was a bright kid. Matter of fact, I tell people all the time, our son was better looking than I am and brighter than I am, and so really had the world by the tail for his future. He got a scholarship, went away to school. Okay, and in his first 2 years of college, he was very successful. He was an honor student in college. In the summer between his second and third year of college, he came back down in this area and hung around East Lansing in student housing quite a bit. And that's really kind of where our nightmare began, although we really didn't know it. He, unbeknownst to us, he met a young lady there and a few other friends and began to use drugs. And as parents, it really caught us with our pants down. Now, part of the issue is Eric wasn't living at home at that time. And so the few times he came home to raid the refrigerator or get his mom to do the laundry, which is really not out of the ordinary for any other college kid, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But what was occurring in the background really was something that was going to end up being a horror for us. Unbeknownst to us, he had dropped his classes. Now, as a parent who was paying for his kids' college, I assumed if something like that occurred, that the money would come back to mom and dad. That's not the case. What happens is it's sent to a third party, and then it's put onto a card, and the card is mailed to the kid. And our son actually had a post office box in East Lansing. And so we were totally unaware of the fact that he had taken our tuition money and dropped all the classes, continued to live in his housing, which was off campus, and chose not to go to school. Now, you can imagine what a term in a 4-year institution costs nowadays, even back then, because it's been a while. But nonetheless, that provided a lot of money for our son to not only get into drug use, but continue drug use really kind of unnoticed, because he wasn't having to steal and lie and cheat in those very beginning days to provide drugs for him and his girlfriend. And we actually did this for 2 terms. And you say, well, Phil, how could you be so stupid, to pay for a second term? Well, as you know, or maybe you don't know, you have to pay for that second term before the first term is over. And so again, we had no idea that our son had begun an addictive cycle going through the lines. And so we assumed he was an addict for about 10 months before we discovered what was going on. Now, that's not really why I'm here. That's a reason maybe to work with people who have a substance abuse problem, but that's really not the reason. Well, is the reason because when he was first arrested in East Lansing, from what he told us was he was with a bunch of kids and they had booze in the car. And we had no reason not to believe him at that time. That was his story. And being the responsible kid that he is, he said, you know, Dad, I got myself into this mess. I'm going to get myself out. You don't even really have to come to the hearings. Well, I decided to go to the hearings anyway. Now, you need to realize that these hearings are way, way, way down the line. He was in jail. We bailed him out. He gave us the story of what was going on with booze. And then he was going to have hearings way down in the future with the magistrate or with the judge at that time. Well, once that occurred, he was now coming back home. We began to notice a difference with him, including the fact that things began to come up missing in our home. And so that's really kind of where the nightmare began for us. And he stole from us several $1,000s. He did a wide variety of things that addictive people do. And when we finally went to court, you know, unlike the medical profession, when you're outside of the judge's chamber or outside the courtroom, they have exactly what it is that's going on with all those clients for the day. And so I could see Eric's name, and next to it, it said that he was caught with a controlled substance. Now, I'm smart enough to know that booze isn't a controlled substance. So I think he was a little shocked to find out that I actually went, even though he told me I didn't have to go. And my first thoughts at that time were, geez, you know, my kid's doing cocaine, the cool drug, right? No, by that time, he was already a heroin addict. And again, that began to start our nightmare. And so, you know, we struggled with his addiction and really touched about everything you can in the system. And to be honest with you, I was quite disappointed. I came from the medical system. I assumed that treating substance abuse or mental health issues were going to be similar to how you treat anything else. And that really turned out not to be the case. So it was kind of an eye-opener for us. You know, once we determined what was going on, I had a lot of connections, and I was able to make a phone call to get him into detox that day. And we did, you know, I had a therapist actually meet him in the emergency room at the hospital that I worked at. And they provided the intake at that time and moved him into a detox center that they had at a sister hospital that was in town. And, you know, I remember sending him there and thinking, man, what's this going to be like? Well, by the third day, we got a phone call that they were sending him out of detox, in which case I remember meeting with the psychiatrist that ran the program and saying, what are you doing? 3 days. My kid's not ready to come out of detox. That's all the insurance would cover at that time was a 3-day detox day. And I said, well, what are we supposed to do? What's our next step? As a parent, I had no idea of what to do, how to do it, who to talk to, anything like that. And I remember the psychiatrist saying, well, we've got a pretty intensive outpatient program that we can send him through. And he began to explain it and went on to explain it. And I eventually kind of said to him, well, you know, let's cut to the chase. What's your success rate with your intensive outpatient program that you had? And he kind of looked at me and sheepishly and said, our recidivism rate for opiate addiction is 97%. And I thought I heard him wrong. I thought he meant 97% success rate. I had no idea that he was talking about a 97% failure rate. And I remember asking him about that and looking at him. And the first thing I said to him was, are you okay with that? I mean, I wouldn't send anyone to any place that has a 97% failure rate. That was kind of my thought process. He just kind of shrugged his shoulders and said, that's really kind of what it is. And he said, I've got some other good news for you, Mr. Pavona. The insurance that you had, and I had good insurance at the time, has a clause in it that we refer to as you use, you lose. If for whatever reason your son fails this outpatient program, you will not be able to access care for substance abuse for a year. Now, that seemed totally bizarre to me. We don't do that with any other disease, but at this time we had this caveat that if your person doesn't do well in his substance abuse program, which was kind of setting him up for failure. I mean, who can do what I know now, who can do an outpatient program after 3 days of detox and not fail? But nonetheless, that was the situation. Well, that's not why I'm here, because again, our son did fail within a few days. He dropped dirty. And ultimately, we were then provided with the impetus of getting our son care and a wide variety of other things, which incidentally is not very cheap when you're not using insurance. Well, again, that's not why I'm here. Am I here because our next step after he failed was to say, well, let's get him into treatment. So off to Brighton he went. Okay. And this has nothing to do against Brighton Recovery Center. Anyone who goes to a residential for 10 to 12 days, that's a heroin addict, is not going to find success. But that's essentially where he was sent and what it is that was provided for him. And he was deemed to be, I guess, in their words, stable. And, you know, stable for a heroin addict simply means that they've been in an environment where they don't have an opportunity to buy, because it really has nothing to do with the amount of time that's necessary to learn a skill set and to kind of deal with all the things that are out there. But nonetheless, back home, he came to us. And I remember calling his family practice doc and his therapist that he had by that time and asking them, did you hear from Brighton? Because we haven't heard a thing. Okay, they just discharged him to us, but we really haven't gotten any update. Our family doc hadn't heard, his therapist had not heard. And again, that was totally bizarre to me because I'm used to discharging patients out of the hospital with follow-up. You don't just send someone home. If they're a cardiac patient, you know, you make sure they have the wherewithal to be able to transition to whatever it is that they have to transition. You don't just boot them out of the facility and say, get a sponsor and go to meetings and good luck, which is essentially what he had heard. That's not why I'm here, because that part of the system stunk. I'm not here because he was arrested a second time in these next several weeks. And at that time, I guess the police were following a drug dealer in our area around. And our son and this drug dealer were arrested in a park. Now, the drug dealer walked simply because he had Eric's $60. Eric, who had $60 worth of heroin on him, was arrested. And I don't have a problem with that. If you're a heroin addict and you're not in treatment or willing to get into treatment, you know, you got one of three choices. You know, it's treatment, it's incarceration, or it's death when you're a heroin addict. Those are really your three choices. You're not going to be, you know, a heroin addict who can provide and keep a job, you know, and actually go on with life. And so we had no qualms with our son getting arrested. That was the right thing to do. As a dad who got a phone call at about 1 or 2 in the afternoon to say your son's been arrested and he's been sent to the jail that's out in Mason, Michigan, it's not the kind of phone call that you want to get. Well, I came home, picked up my wife, out to Mason we went, and we're on kind of a live circuit screen. And at that time, we can see our son in his jumpsuit and chained around his ankles and around his waist and hands. Now, granted, you know, this is a 21-year-old kid who's sick as a dog, and that's just kind of how you see someone that's in jail. For us, we had never been to jail before, never done anything like that, so it was new to us. And on another TV screen was the magistrate, and on the third TV screen was my wife and I, all kind of looking at each other, doing this closed circuit conversation. And apparently the charges for our son at that time were such that the magistrate said that he could be facing up to 40 years in prison. Now, I thought I was going to poop my pants when I heard that. Come to find out, when our son was arrested, either because he was stupid and naive or going through withdrawal at the time, or maybe high at the time, I know he was going to be very, you know, he knew we'd be disappointed in him, obviously. He knew he was going to go back to jail because he was on probation. But for whatever particular reason, the first words out of his mouth to the policeman were, "It's not for me, it's for someone else," which is intent to deliver, which is a felony, which brought him all the charges that he had. And I remember weeks later going into the courtroom and saying to the judge, first of all, do you not have a sobriety judge in this court? Because obviously our son has an issue. And wouldn't it make sense to have a person who is specially trained in trying to navigate this system as a sobriety judge? And I was told by the judge at the time that you really can't judge shop. The prosecuting attorney had already essentially assigned it. And that's how this lady judge got it. She was a wonderful woman, had nothing to do with that. It just didn't make sense to me that if you had a sobriety judge and you have someone in front of you who has sobriety problems, that you not assign it that way. That would be like you coming to me with chest pain and me sending you to an orthopedic surgeon. It just didn't make any sense to me. But that's how the system was at the time. And I remember saying to the judge, look, judge, You obviously know that $60 worth of heroin found on our son does not make a dealer. Look, he has track marks up and down his arms. This is obviously a kid who is a user buying enough drugs, stealing enough or whatever to get money to buy drugs for him and his girlfriend. And what we're happening now is, we're faced with dealing with felony charges where, we feel we have to get an attorney and kind of fight this system and take our eye off helping our kid to actually put our eye on in fighting the system, because who the heck wants to hire a felon? It was important for us to get our kid to be able to come out onto the other side. But nonetheless, that's what we were faced with. Well, that's not why I'm here, because of that issue. Am I here because when he got arrested, back into jail he went. Now, he stayed in jail this time for 3 or 4 months. We had a lot of people telling us, you don't want to bail him out. This is the place for him, which today makes perfect sense. Back then, as a parent, I really didn't know what to do. But he was released after about 3 months, not because anything occurred. He was released simply because the jail was overcrowded. And these kids are considered to be not a danger to anyone but themselves. And those are the people that they happen to release. Well, they released him on a tether, okay? And so back home he came. And as a parent who, again, is very naive in the situation, my first thought process was, well, you know what? He hasn't had DeLuca's pizza, for 3 months. He hasn't had air conditioning. He hasn't had a big screen TV to watch sports on like he could at our home. And so chances are it's going to be a while before the novelty of having nice things again wears off to where I would have to worry about his substance abuse problems. Again, I had no idea and did not understand anything to do with addiction. Now you say, well, Phil, why didn't you try to educate yourself a little bit better? I did. I went to Al-Anon meetings, but I remember the second Al-Anon meeting I went to, I raised my hand and I said, look, there are parents here who have had kids struggling with addiction for several months into several years, where it's very new to us. And I need to meet these parents and begin to ask them questions, because what it is that we're trying to do doesn't seem to work. And we have no idea of which way and where to turn. And I was told at that time that there's no crosstalk allowed at these meetings and that it's anonymous. And so you really can't get to know the people during the meeting. I said, that's cool. Where is the meeting place that's not anonymous and where there's a lot of crosstalk so parents can begin to work with each other? I mean, that's what we do with every other disease model. The family is part of the system. They all shrugged their shoulders and didn't know anything about that. And so Al-Anon meetings for me proved to be not very beneficial at that time. Well, anyway, home our son comes. And we were told at that time that the next time he shows up to court, he better have a sponsor. Now, over the months, we're several months into this now. I'm kind of jumping ahead, but we're several months into this. And we had been trying to ask the professionals, our therapist, the courts, anyone who would listen to us, what's the best way to help our son find a sponsor? And I wasn't overly enthused with their answer, which was, well, your kid just has to keep going to meetings and he'll meet someone and they'll click and that'll be a sponsor for him. Now, I didn't tell you this earlier, but our son was forced to go to meetings in the very beginning when he was arrested. And since he lost his license, I was the one that was taking him to meetings. And since, the narcotics meetings are kind of inner city Lansing, none of them in the suburbs at churches where we live, it took us, 40 minutes to get there. And by the time, I would leave, I'd have to go right back. So I just stayed in the parking lot, kind of waiting for him to come out of the meetings. Well, during the hour that he was there, people would come in and out of the meeting place and cars would drive up and I could see people's hands going through windows. I was smart enough to recognize that they were selling drugs right in the parking lot of where this meeting place was. And so obviously as a dad, I said, I'm not going to bring my kid to this hellhole anymore. So we tried a different meeting place. That one was all boarded up, even though it was on the internet and they were no longer providing meetings there. The third place I chose to take our son was through our local hospital where that intensive outpatient program was. On Wednesday and Saturday nights, they had meetings there as well. And so I took him there. Well, since I worked for the system and had a badge, I thought, I want to see what these meetings are like. And so I kind of went into the meeting and kind of sat in the background and watched. And I can remember saying to myself, well, geez, I hope that young lady sits at his table or this young man, but not this person over here. Now, again, those are overgeneralizations on my part that I should not have done, But I can tell you, when there's someone there that has swastikas all over their face, they're sending you a message. And that message is not the kind of message that you really want your kid to be hanging around. Well, guess who goes and sits at my kid's table before the meeting starts? Mr. Swastika Face. And I remember leaving the meeting later on with our son and saying, what was the deal with the skinhead there that wanted to have a conversation with you? And our son's comment to me was, he wanted to know if I needed money, if I needed drugs, if I was willing to kind of join their group to help them out, they could provide it. And who was the old man that brought you in, and do you need us to kick his ass? And that was me. And so again, as a dad, you can understand that the last place I think he's going to find a sponsor is at meeting places like that. And I remember saying that to the people that we were asking, where is the place where there are sponsors that can be interviewed, if that's the word, if you want, or whatever, can be trusted to help your kid. Now, not that a 60-year-old alcoholic could not help a 22-year-old heroin addict, but the cultures are different with respect to how they've been brought up in generations. And the difference between alcoholism and heroin addiction is a fairly large difference when you look at what's going on in communities. If you're an alcoholic and you decide not to drink, the guy behind the 7-Eleven couldn't give a rat's butt as to whether or not you buy booze or not. But you know what? When you're a heroin addict, the cockroaches in the community are relentless. When he got out of jail on his tether, I had his phone that night. It blew up. People knew that he'd bought drugs from that were dealers, that he was out of jail before I even knew he was out of jail. They showed up at our home at 2:30 in the morning. I mean, they're just relentless cockroaches, particularly for a suburban kid who's known to have money in his pocket. And so again, we couldn't find a sponsor. Well, anyway, they told us the next time we show up to court, we better have a sponsor. While he was in jail, a guy that he met at Brighton had called, said that he sponsored people there. He met Eric, kind of liked Eric, and they hit it off. And I, we got to talking, and I said, look, at that point, we were willing to find a sponsor anywhere in the community. And so we invited that gentleman to our home, and it turned out that it was a scam. It was actually a drug dealer. That day, even though this man came and had dinner with us, actually went to church service with us that night, he had provided heroin for our son, and our son overdosed for the first time in our home. Now, again, in my mind, the last thing that would be on Eric's mind is using drugs again. He had been in jail for 3 months. He's home now. I figured triggers wouldn't have to hit for a while until the novelty wore off. That just shows you how much I understood about addiction, okay? And so our son did overdose for the first time that night at midnight, and it was not a nice scene. He went into the bathroom at about midnight. I heard a crash in the bathroom. I went to the bathroom. I couldn't open the door. It was locked. It's just one of those little holes that you put a pen in. But even though I was able to open the door, he had slid out the vanity drawer, and I could only open the door about 3 or 4 inches. And I could see him unconscious, gurgling on the floor, okay, with a needle off to the side. And so I, started to hit the door with my shoulder. I could not break it down. By this time, our other kids are up. They're crying. My wife is crying. They're dialing 911. My back is up against the hallway wall, and I'm kicking with all my strength with my feet, trying to break the door down. No luck. So I sent my wife out to the garage to get a sledgehammer. I sledgehammered a hole in the drawer. By the time I was able to reach around and try to close the drawer, I bent it so much that I had to bust that into a million pieces. And then into the bathroom I went. By that time, our son was not only unconscious, but not breathing as blue as any blue could be. And so I began CPR on our son. The police were the first to arrive. They were wonderful. They simply looked at what I was doing and said, you seem to know what it is that you're doing. Now, at that time, the police did not have Narcan. You got to remember, this is going back to 2009, 2010, 2011. And so eventually the ambulance got there. They threw me a bag. I began to bag him. We got a tube ready. They put in an IV and Narcan in, and whoa, he woke right up, just like Lazarus, And off to the hospital we went. Well, that is not why I'm here, because that was such a crummy thing to go through. We went to the hospital. He got great care. We were there for 10 or 12 hours, treated like royalty, okay? They were very concerned about our son, whatever it happens to be. Well, the next day, obviously, he had broken his tether, and I called and said, well, I called this probation person that was on call and said, obviously, our son broke his tether. Do you need me to take him back to jail? And they said, no, Mr. Pavona, we'll meet on this on Monday. This is a Sunday now. We'll meet on this on Monday and we'll determine what our next step should be. 2 hours later, there was a knock at the door. It was the sheriff's department there to arrest our son. So not only is the system kind of broke, a probation officer feels like they have to lie to me, like I'm going to hide my son or tell him to run simply because he kind of once again relapsed and broke the law. No way. I just want what's best for my son. But that's the system. And it wasn't the state cops or the sheriff's fault. They're just there doing a job. But I had told the person, look, if you want me to take him to jail, I'll take him to jail. No use having to do all this rigmarole that we're doing. But that's kind of how the system is. Well, again, that's not why I'm here. Am I here because the next day when I returned to that jail and returned the tether, the woman said to me, you know, Mr. Pavona, you're one of the lucky ones. Now, I'm still shaking from doing CPR on my own kid. Okay, I didn't feel very lucky. And so I remember saying to her, what do you mean I'm one of the lucky ones? She said, well, you know, we let 19 people out Friday morning from jail, which incidentally, they let them out at 5 o'clock in the morning, which is a great time, right? You can really transition into housing or anything else at 5 in the morning. Why do they do that? Because at 12:01 becomes an official day. Breakfast is at 6. So they can essentially get paid for the day if they boot them out before 6 and it doesn't cost them a penny. All about the economics, follow the money. But anyway, nonetheless, she said 19 people were let out on Friday. 5 of those people overdosed over the weekend and 3 of them died. And I remember saying to her, you mean to tell me 5 kids overdosed, 3 of them died, and I didn't see it on the news. I didn't read it in the paper. And, you know, it's just kind of cavalier. What are these throwaway kids? And she kind of shrugged her shoulders. And then the next thing she said kind of pissed me off, to be honest with you. She said, you know, these kids, when they get out of rehab or they get out of jail, no matter how long they're in there, you know, the first thing they want to do in those first few days is use. And I remember saying to her, why didn't you tell me that? You told me how to pay for the tether. Why didn't you also tell me, Mr. Pavona, you know what? It's not going to make sense to you, but the minute your kid gets out of jail, he's going to want to use again. So you need to be very careful and keep an eye on him and begin to do your transition. Because I would have certainly not invited a stranger into our home had I known that. So it seems like there's a person that has information that wasn't able to and or willing to share it. Well, again, that's not why I'm here, okay? Am I here because we had a therapist that was willing to see our son in jail? And I remember getting a call from our therapist saying, they're not allowing me to see your son. She had all the correct paperwork. It was at the visiting times for professionals. And essentially, when I went to the jail, their comment to me was, we're in the housing movement business here in jail. We're not in the treatment business. That's somebody else's gig. And I remember thinking, what a foolish thing. I mean, you've got somebody that's a captive audience. Why don't you make some hay out of it versus, you know, making it an inconvenience? But that's kind of what the situation is. And so, as you see, we went through a whole bunch of processes with a whole bunch of different situations that kind of led to black cloud following us around and really luck not occurring. Now, I want to go back to these slides for just a minute, okay? As I said earlier, 90% of these kids have something in common, okay? Well, I lied a little bit on that. 100% of these kids are opiate addicts. And so when you look at these pictures and you look at them, and you say, you know, is that man an opiate addict? Is that man an opiate addict? The beautiful young lady from up in the UP, the kid with the braces, okay, all of these kids, yes, they're all opiate addicts, okay? 90% of these 50 people are heroin addicts, okay? So not only are they playing around with pills, they actually transition into being heroin addicts. And so you look at these kids' faces and you say to that young kid with braces, him, does he look like a heroin addict to you? He is, okay. You look at this young man, does he look like a heroin addict to you? He is, okay. And so once again, I hope you begin to see that these kids probably don't look much different. Daniel here doesn't look much different than your own sons and daughters, nieces and nephews, brothers and sisters. And yes, indeed, 9 out of 10 of these kids are heroin addicts, okay? Of that 90% that are heroin addicts, 90% of them began their heroin addiction through prolonged prescription drug abuse. I'm not talking days into weeks. I'm talking weeks into months into years. So they all transition from Vicodin, Oxycontin, Percocet, Norco, whatever it is that you want to call. That's our son right there. So all of these kids literally are dealing with opiate addiction, 90% heroin addicts. I also said 50% have something in common. 50% of these kids are dead. Okay. And so when you look at these folks and you say to yourself, how can I tell which ones would have died? Again, I picked on a few kids that are in here. Yes, the young man with the braces is dead. His parents found him in his basement, dead from a heroin overdose. Yes, that beautiful young lady from the UP is dead from a heroin overdose. Yes, Daniel, I mentioned Daniel, I know his mom really well. He also died of a heroin overdose. And so 50% of the people that are in these slides are dead. And that's really sad, because when these kids die, it's not only them that are gone. I mean, they leave behind parents, grandparents, siblings who have broken hearts that'll never mend, okay? And that's the epidemic that we're in. Now I'm going to switch to the next slide really quick here. I'm going to ask my moderator to kind of go to that next slide. But again, I use those slides because I'm trying to touch your heart. I'm trying to get you to see your own brothers and sisters or sons and daughters in the faces of those kids. Because if you don't, you won't remember half of what it is that I'm saying to you right now, okay? So we're going to have a slide up here in just a second. And when we get to that slide, I'm also going to tell you that this slide is really not the reason why it is that I do what I do. And again, I'm going to give our moderator just another second to bring that slide up. And I'm going to take a sip of water. This is where we visit our son now. Our son was one of the 50% that is dead, okay? And one of the things that I want to mention to you, I hope you can see, my wife and I were married on August 28th, 1982. Our son died of an overdose on August 28th, 2011. And so our son died in our home on our 29th wedding anniversary, okay? But this is not why it is that I'm here, because by this time, I'm here to tell you, we were burned out. We were emotionally burned out, financially burned out, physically burned out. As a family, we simply wanted peace. Everywhere we turned, there was chaos and nothing seemed to go right, okay? Failure after failure after failure. As parents, we didn't know what to do. We couldn't find the right advice. It was just a system that was really kind of broke. And so again, this is not why it is that I'm here. Well, why is it that I'm here? Well, I can tell you. As you see, he died on August 28th. On August 22nd, okay, our son wanted to go out with a girlfriend. He was home, had been home from jail for several weeks, doing well, was seeing a therapist, was actually going to meetings and seemed to have that spark in his life again. But he wanted to go out with his girlfriend, not the original girl that introduced him to drugs. And I hold no animosity towards her. She was as sick as our son became, but a young lady that he met at a 12-step meeting. And we had reservations about that. But at the time, he's 25 years old. Well, he had a meeting with his therapist at 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock. And then he was going to go out for, coffee and a donut with her in the evening. And he got home by 10:45, okay? And so everything seemed fine. He said it was nice seeing Dana. Everything went well. And he had a curfew. And so, he said, I'm going to go to bed, read a book or whatever it happened to be. And my wife and I thought, good, we got past one more hurdle here. Unbeknownst to us, we did not know this, she had provided heroin for the two of them. And our son had overdosed in her car. And she dialed 911. The ambulance came at a strip mall about a mile from our home and took our son by ambulance to the hospital, the same hospital we were at several months before when he'd overdosed the first time, the same hospital that I worked at, okay? Now, our son got to that hospital at about 9:15, okay? Our son was home by 11:45, okay? Now, when mom and dad, okay, kind of went through this whole process, we were at that hospital for 12 hours, got the greatest care in the world. When my son is there with a girlfriend, essentially a street urchin, well, what kind of care does he get? He's there for less than a couple hours. They Narcan him a couple of times and boot him out into the street, okay? Now, the only reason I know this even occurred is not anything that had to do with the hospital or his girlfriend or with our son. Okay. And this is really the reason why I do what it is that I do. You know, once our son died, we were very honest about what happened to him, about the whole circumstances of his addiction. We were quiet while we were going through it, mostly because we were trying to maintain his reputation, but we were also certainly embarrassed as well. But nonetheless, you know, once we knew what was going on and he had died that way, we shared it with anyone that asked. And we started to get a lot of phone calls of condolences. We were honest at his funeral about what it is that occurred with him. And out of the woodworks, people that I had worked with for 30 years, people from our subdivision, people from our church, they all began to call offering condolences, but they had an ulterior motive. And that ulterior motive was we had outed ourselves. And they now had an opportunity to say to me, a minute into the conversation, in tears, our son's a heroin addict. My daughter's a heroin addict. My niece, my nephew, my brother, my sister. I must have heard from 25 people within a 2 to 3 week period, all of them struggling with young people that were struggling with opiates and addiction. And so that was my first inclination that we did have an epidemic on our hands, okay? And so that's partly why I'm here. We thought it was just our son had a black cloud, he made a bad decision, died from his decision, and on we go, okay? Well, that really wasn't it. There was a silent epidemic happening in the background. The more important reason is this. A few weeks after our son died, I went out to the mailbox and there was something from the hospital addressed to him. And I opened it up, and lo and behold, it was a patient satisfaction questionnaire wanting to know how he felt about the care that he received in the ER on August 22nd. Now remember, our son died August 28th, 6 days later. We thought he was doing well on August 22nd, okay? And so I looked at that and I picked up the phone and I called the ER. And I said, hey, I understand you guys treated our son on August 22nd. I need to talk to somebody about that. Well, you can guess what their next comment was. Well, Mr. Pavona, we can't share anything like that with you because of HIPAA. And I remember saying a swear word that I'm going to say right now. I said, bullshit. HIPAA has never been intended to allow an addict or someone with a mental health issue to provide inadequate care and for you to not help someone when they're in a situation like that. The intent behind HIPAA is so that they can't be discriminated against with respect to employers and jobs and healthcare and a wide variety of other things. We know addicts and mental health people hide their disease. Why would you continue to allow yourselves to be part of that whole process? And I said, besides, we had signed every piece of HIPAA paperwork known to man, not only at that hospital, but the other hospitals and with all the healthcare providers. And so the nurse went into the computer and said, well, Mr. Pavona, I can see that there is a HIPAA release form signed here, but since your son has died, I really don't know what to do with the information. And I said, forget it. I'll have his chart pulled. And so I called our family doctor and asked him to pull our chart. And the next day he called me and said, Phil, why don't you come into my office? You will not like what you see in this chart. And so I went to his office, and in the chart, there were a couple of things in there. First of all, the nursing notes and the physician notes didn't jive. The physician said he was a drive-by, which is very common. And the nursing note said he came in by ambulance with a girlfriend in tow. I tell people all the time, you want to know what's really going on with a patient? Talk to the nurse. They know what's going on. Often the doctor doesn't. That's just the truth of the matter. Well, anyway, in our system, and I'm sure it's that way in most ERs, if you come in by ambulance, on the clipboard, the very first thing that's on the clipboard, and then in sequential order underneath it, is the ambulance sheet. And so obviously, I knew right away that that physician didn't even look at my kid's chart before he went into his room to do whatever it was that he was going to do. Secondly, in his progress notes, it said a few things that, again, one thing that kind of ticked me off. It said he was a known heroin addict, true. Non-compliant, that's obviously true. He's there as an overdose. And then it said, no support system, essentially a street kid. And I thought to myself, who the hell am I? Who's his therapist? Who's his family practice doc? Who's a psychiatrist? All of us doing what we could do over a 2 to 3 year period to try to save our sons' lives. And so once again, I was faced with the idea that these kids are throwaway kids that are treated like a number, and unless mom and dad is right there with them, they're going to be booted out and not provided any care. And so that was the impetus really to do what it is that I do. Because at that time I said to myself, you know, if the hospital system, which we expect to be the last bastion of care, is that poor in doing what it is that they do for people, including kids, then somebody better get off their fat duff and do something. And the old saying, if not me, then who, came to mind. And so that was the impetus for me to begin to get involved and to do a wide variety of things that I do. Now, having said all of that, that's the horror part of our story. And as you can expect, it really sucks. Now, I'm here to tell you, had that hospital called us and told us that our son was in the ER and had overdosed, and you need to get there because your kid's in bad shape, I can guarantee you our kid would not have died on our anniversary, because I would have gotten him back into treatment and started the whole process again. Now, he may have died 6 months later, but I can guarantee you he would not have died on our anniversary. And you can expect, or you can kind of get the idea of how our 30th anniversary was. The first anniversary of our son's death and the 30th anniversary of our marriage. And so to this day, our anniversaries aren't really what you would want an anniversary to be. And so I feel like my own hospital let us down by actually providing the impetus for this to occur at that time. And so that's why it is that I do what it is that I do. So what's the hope part? Okay, when we get to the hope part, really, what is it? Well, I'm the founder of Families Against Narcotics in Ingham County, okay? And as an entity, we have 4 goals. The entity of that goal is, first goal is prevention. This is all preventable, okay? I mean, you know, we're losing kids left and right, and kids are losing their futures left and right based on the fact that this is a preventable disease that we can do better from, okay? And so as an individual and as an entity, we do a lot of preventative things. I have given hundreds of talks over the years in colleges and in high schools. I generally do it. I bring an addict with me, a young man and a young lady. Doesn't matter where they are in their recovery, because to be honest with you, I'm not asking them to be a mentor. I'm asking them to look other kids in the eye that are very close in age to them to say, look, there's a line you never want to cross. And doing opiates and doing meth and doing this crap is a line you don't want to cross, because it'll steal your soul, steal your dreams, and ultimately could steal your whole future. And so I have them come into the school with me to try to make the case that y'all don't want to go down this path, because nothing good occurs. I also spend a lot of time with prescribers, physicians, nurse practitioners, dentists, whomever, because you know what? As we said before, when 80 to 90% of these kids are beginning their heroin addiction through prescription drugs, at that time, drugs were available like Skittles. Our second daughter down the line had her wisdom teeth pulled at this time when Eric was struggling. What happened? She got a script and 30 Vicodin, okay? Our last daughter, who had her wisdom teeth pulled 2 years ago, same practice, same physician, no Vicodin. So the word is out now. Physicians are doing a much better job in what their prescribing practices are. Our second goal is to change the face and stigma of addiction. I'm here today to do that. I'm here to tell you, if you don't know what a dad of a heroin addict looks like, you're looking at him right now, okay? If you don't know what a heroin addict looks like, it was the young man that you saw that had a woman putting on a buttonniere, a flower for him. That was our oldest daughter's wedding. He was not doing drugs at the time. He was in his second year of college. That's what a heroin addict ultimately comes from and begins to look like. And the pictures that I showed you in the slideshow, again, I try to touch your heart so that they mean something to you, because they are heroin addicts. Our third goal is obviously to have a family form. As you know, I mentioned before, I found not a lot out of Al-Anon meetings. Some people find a lot out of them. I don't discourage people from going to them, but I wanted to create a meeting to where you get together and families get together, and our forums are different than other meetings in 3 ways. First of all, we're not anonymous. We get to know each other. I can't help people unless I know their background, their circumstances, what their kid is doing, how long he's been doing it, just like you do an intake for any other disease when you're trying to have the best outcome. Secondly, it's educational. We have people come and they provide education. I'm not talking about sad stories like mine. I'm talking about an addiction specialist coming and talking about opiates 101 and brain chemistry and co-disorders, how to recognize when to treat, when not to treat, pharmacological intervention, the good, the bad, the ugly. Therapists coming in and talking about relapse prevention plan. The courts coming in and talking about how to navigate the court and how to get into a specialty court. A wide variety of things like that. And the last way it's different is we have all entities in the room at the same time. In other meetings, those who struggle with SUD may be in a 12-step meeting. Maybe their parents are in an Al-Anon meeting in a different room, maybe even on a different night, and the professionals are nowhere to be found. At our family forum, we are all in the room at the same time, okay? And then our last goal is to have an impact, okay? Whether it's providing Narcan free of charge and training families, whether it's our Hope Not Handcuffed programs, which we've had over 4,500 people go into treatment, whether it's me going in and out of the jails and acting as a family recovery coach and beginning the process and then moving the family and the person who struggles, finding them a therapist, finding them detox, finding them rehab, finding them relapse prevention, finding them safe avenues for meetings, finding them transportation, whatever it takes. And so those are many of the things that we do as an entity within the community with our fourth goal. We also have a program that's called Family Recovery Coaching that I provide, and FAN provides it free of charge. That's a presentation I'm doing next week, actually explaining what's involved in doing that. But for me as a person, our son's death was about as stupid and inconsequential as it could be. We look, no matter what the situation is, I tell people who struggle with addiction and I tell their family all the time, look, this is the deal. You have to make a decision. You can either do nothing or you can do something. Our son died. It's horrible. We could crawl into our own little corner and mourn him for the rest of our lives. But to be honest with you, I find solace in the fact that when I help families, I'm interested in no other family having to bury a kid. I'm interested in kids getting their future back. And when we help the families do that, and I see them 2 or 3 years later, and they come up to me and say, Phil, I'm still really doing well, and I appreciate all you did for me in those first several months, that allows me to feel like our son's death wasn't in vain and something good occurred because of it. The last thing I want to say is, as part of the CEU process, we looked at a couple of 3 things that I wanted to mention. Regardless of your position, what can you do to help a SUD person and their family members? The best thing you can do is what I say at the end of all my presentations is, I know you will do the right thing, whether you're from police, nursing, social worker, the courts, whatever it happens to be, just an interested party, okay? If before you say anything and before you do anything with either the person who struggles or their family, if you step back and say, if this was my own son, what would I say and do right now? I know if you do that, you will say and do the right thing. I know had the policeman who wrote down what our son said about it not being for him, which then caused the issue of having to be intent to deliver. I know if that was his own son, he probably would have told that kid, shut up, get in the backseat of the car and don't say another word. You're making it worse for yourself. Would the community have been safe had he done that? Yes. Would the officer have been safe? Yes. Would the kid still be in jail? Yes. The only difference is he wouldn't be facing felony charges and you wouldn't have a family having to spend $17,000 and hire an attorney to try to go through this whole process. I know the physician in the ER, had that been his son, he would not have booted our kid out within 2 hours. He would have kept him there, probably admitted him and made sure he transitioned into care and certainly called the family. I know had the jailer been someone that he would allow people in there to provide care and provide meetings and everything else, which incidentally we do all the time now. Again, I could tell you every one of the entities that we touched, had they had that thought process in the very beginning, the process would have been a lot differently. And so that's what you can do. Begin to treat these people as if they're their own son and daughter. Okay. The other thing is, when you talk about barriers to care, certainly barriers to care are insurance. If you have commercial insurance, you're screwed. You're lucky if you can get 10 to 14 days, which, come on, we all know a meth addict, a crystal meth addict, a heroin addict, a crack cocaine addict. Come on, that's barely detox. Now, we're very fortunate in Michigan. We do have healthy Michigan plans where we can find, 60 to 90 days of treatment, which is a really good thing. But again, commercial insurance is often a problem. Bed space is often a problem. The attitudes of the community are often a problem. HIPAA is a problem, and it does not have to be, okay? HIPAA, again, was never intended to allow anyone to provide substandard care. If you are concerned about a person's care, you can simply chart, I made contact with this person or these people because I was afraid that this person was going to die. Because let's face it, you Narcan them in an ER, you put them into immediate withdrawal. What the heck do you think is going to happen if you boot them back out into the street? Nothing worse for them. And so again, do not allow HIPAA to be that impetus to where you're not providing quality care. So those are a lot of the roadblocks. You know, the last thing is, why might you in your position be one like me in my position to be able to have a great impact? Well, I'm going to go back to what I said before. If not you, then who? That really is kind of the answer. So I'm real close to the end of my time. I do want to open it up for 5 to 10 minutes if we have it for any questions. But again, our horror story was horrible, but I'm very, very appreciative of the fact that there are a lot of people who network with me in our community free of charge that provide a lot of the things that we provide today.
Phil, we do have a couple of questions. You
Sure.
talked about a lot of things that professionals can do. Any other tips for things that families can do to encourage families to help a loved one suffering from substance use?
Absolutely. One of the things I have to tell you, because this is true with any disease entity, you really have to be an advocate. And so as a professional, you have to explain. What the problem for us was, every time we experienced something, it was horrible. And we could never ask ahead of time what it is that we are experiencing, because you don't even know what to ask. If it's never happened to you before, how do you even ask about it? So as professionals, you need to take the impetus and say, you know what, as a mom or a dad, you haven't asked this question yet. And so I'm going to ask it for you and explain what the next step should probably look like. Because again, we had no idea what care was supposed to look like. Talk about not being naive. We figured we'd send our kid to treatment. 3 weeks later, he'd be back in college doing what he was doing before. We didn't understand addiction. I'm here to tell you, most parents don't, you know. And so as a professional, you can say to these parents, look, there are things available in the community free of charge. Again, Families Against Narcotics offers family recovery coaching free of charge. We will work with any family and then network with them in helping their kid. Because obviously, if we don't also try to help their kid at the same time we're helping them, you know, they're not going to be interested in whatever, because their biggest concern happens to be their kid. And so as a professional, please step back and say to yourself, again, if this was my own kid, what should this kid's next step be? Because most parents are good people. They just don't know what to do. Now, granted, I've had a couple of kids whom I would not send back into that family situation. Out of dozens and dozens and dozens that I've worked with, that's not the norm. That's the abnorm. The norm is we just don't know what the hell to do. We don't know where to go. We turn our care over to the professionals. And then, you know, as a dad, you know what system treated us the best? The funeral system. Now, isn't that sad? They took us by the hand and led us through the whole process and wore the armor with us. The courts didn't do that with us. The hospital didn't do that with us. Our son's therapist didn't do that with us. Matter of fact, I didn't have conversations with any of them other than when they wanted my insurance card and wanted me to pay for something. That's it. Now, do we do that with cancer? Do we do that with diabetes? Do we do that with heart disease? No. We get the family involved and we try to form a team relationship with everyone. And so as professionals, please don't allow HIPAA to scare you into doing the wrong thing. I have a letter from the Secretary of Social Services in Washington, D.C., the head, that said, yes, in an emergency situation like an overdose or anything else, you can reach out to whomever you have to reach out, even if the kid says to you, I don't want you calling my parents. What kid is going to say, call my parents? That's not what addicts do. But again, the only way you're going to save their life is being able to have the opportunity to do that. What other questions might you have?
All right, Phil. We really appreciate everything and all the questions that everyone submitted, Phil, and we appreciate your willingness to go ahead and answer those questions. We're going to go ahead and actually start the wrap up now just because of time, but
Sure, and you can send me those questions. I can send them back to you and you can ship them out in any way, shape, or
Great.
form. And I don't mind people
Great.
calling me. You can give them my name, my telephone number, my email address. I have no qualms with any of that, okay?
That's great. For those of you that are watching, we may be able to add that information onto our registration page. When you go under Phil's information on the registration page, you can find the quiz, you can find the Phil's biography, and any additional information or resources that Phil provides us, we can see if we can add that onto that page. So that could be an easy resource if you wanted to contact Phil with any other questions, information, or just to touch base with him, if that's all right, Phil.
Yeah, and again, I'm honored to be here. Thank you guys, and I hope you watch next week.
Thank you so much, Phil. Your story was amazing. It was personal, it was powerful, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so for those of you that are viewing, we're going to go ahead and do our wrap up. Again, we want to thank Phil Pavona immensely for his powerful information and his voice in all of this. We've reached the end of our webinar time. And to conclude, we wanted to do some general wrap up. Just to let folks know, when the webinar closes, a webpage will pop up automatically and it'll bring you to a really brief survey. And I can't say how much we appreciate folks' feedback, because your feedback really helps us with our webinars better improve things as we go through the remainder of the series. And again, this is the 5th in our series. I believe we have 19 total. For individuals that participated today and again are eligible for continuing education credits, a couple of things. We had our in and out codes. So our out code for today is the word spring, all caps, SPRING, spring. Our in code, in case you missed it, was winter, all caps, WINTER, winter. In code was winter, out code was spring. We've had questions again about the quiz and survey. They were sent via email when you registered for the webinar. If you don't have them, can't find them, please go on to sccmh.org under our events page, and under Phil's information, you can click onto the survey and you can click. Sorry, a little glitch. You can go into SCCMH. Okay. All right, hopefully everyone can hear me now. Oh, good, okay. We were talking about the quizzes and the surveys. You can go to sccmh.org under Phil's information under the event page. You can access his bio, you can access the survey, and you can access the quiz as well too. Certificates of completion and any kind of CE's information will be provided, but it will be provided at the very end of our webinar series, which goes on throughout September. So those will be provided generally the first week of October. Today's presentation, again, is the 5th of many webinars going through the month of September, and you can certainly still register for any kind of upcoming presentations right before the presentation. We wanted to remind everybody our next webinar series is actually scheduled, our presentation for tomorrow, which is Friday, September 11th, and that's going to be at 9:00 a.m. We're very fortunate to have Devin France and Reva Mitchell. They will take you on their journey of recovery, the changes that they've made to improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and what has helped them stay in recovery. Please join us tomorrow and Reva and Devin to learn about their emotional resilience, how you can contribute to uplifting those with substance use disorder, and how to help change the narrative of addiction, build community, and create connections. And we really hope you can join us. Again, that's tomorrow at 9 a.m. Thank you again, Phil Pavona, for sharing your story. Thank you for everyone who joined us today, those of you that have joined us throughout the series, new joiners today. And as a reminder, again, you can register for upcoming parts of the webinar at sccmh.org. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.